In 1940, darkness fell over the City of Light as Hitler's Nazi troops occupied Paris. Jews were targeted, arrested, deported. Their possessions stolen and sold to fuel the German war effort. After the war, the Allies came upon thousands of looted pieces of art from all the great masters, including Amedeo Modigliani. One of his paintings that disappeared around that time continues to spark controversy to this day. So we travel to France to see if we can solve the mystery of the masterpiece.
So we're in Villeneuve d'Ascq, where there's a very well-known museum of contemporary art. And there's an exhibition going on right now that we really don't want to miss.
An old master is the new star in town. The Lille Museum of Modern Art is drawing large crowds for a special exhibit of the paintings of Modigliani, one of the most cherished figures of modernism. The Jewish-Italian painter was known for his soulful portraits and his erotic depiction of women.
Modigliani's nude were quite controversial at his time, but became very popular after. There's one that was sold at an auction just last November for $170 million. But it's a simple portrait of a man that became embroiled in controversy almost 100 years later.
In 1918, Modigliani began work on a seated man with a cane. He could never have imagined the uproar his painting would cause in the future. Modigliani was a grand bohemian struggling with addiction and disease. He lived at an exciting time in Paris when it was the hub of the art world, surrounded by some of the greatest artists of the day.
He was living near what's known as Carrefour Vauban, where you had Picasso, Modigliani, Mondrian, Diego Rivera, a large number of artists within like 100 yards of that intersection.
Art historian Kenneth Wayne has researched Modigliani for almost 30 years.
In the last year or two of his life, those are among some of the most coveted paintings that he produced.
At first dismissed, Modigliani's art became increasingly popular and pricier shortly after his death. The coveted seated man with a cane ended up with this man, Oskar Stettner, according to his family today. Stettner was a prosperous Jewish art dealer. He ran a successful gallery located on the posh Avenue Matignon near the Champs-Élysées. But then his life came crashing down as the Nazis started their advance through Europe.
Oskar Stettner, like many Jews in the area, had to flee. He went to the south of France, where the family had a home. Unfortunately, many of his possessions, they were looted and sold off. And one of those items was the Modigliani painting.
Canadian James Palmer is in the business of finding art looted by the Nazis and returning it to the rightful owners for a fee. He believes Seated Man with a Cane was stolen from Oskar Stettner and belongs to his one surviving grandson.
The ultimate goal is to get the painting back for our clients.
But that's not going to be easy. Right now, the masterpiece is locked up in a Geneva warehouse. And Palmer will have to take on the company claiming to own it today, along with their heavyweight New York lawyer, Richard Golub. He dismisses the Stettner's family claim.
This is a proofless case. I don't think it belonged to his grandfather, and I don't think that he's got a claim.
You suggested that I give you a call, and I wanted to speak to you about...
James Palmer felt confident he could win, but how could he prove the case? A breakthrough happened in Venice. In the archives of one of the most famous art shows in the world, the Biennale.
I went to the archives excited in anticipation of what I would find and hoping that I would find something.
And he did. In files from the 1930 exhibit, Palmer spots a photograph of seated man with a cane. The catalog says painting number 35 is from the Stettner collection in Paris. And then this, a letter copied to the Biennale's director in 1930. Stettner is clearly referred to as the propriétaire or owner of the Modigliani.
There's ownership of that.
For Palmer, this was compelling evidence, bolstering Stettner's family claim.
You've got a photograph of the painting, the same painting that we're pursuing, and you've got reference to Oscar Stettner's ownership of that painting.
Whatever the ownership of the Modigliani in the 1930s, things got murky afterwards. Did ownership of the painting change? Where did the painting go? To help us uncover the mystery, we meet up in Paris with Willy Corte, a sort of Sherlock Holmes of the art world. His specialty, tracking down art looted by the Nazis. Corte has recovered 12 paintings for the Max Stern Art Restitution Project in Canada. We stop at 18 Avenue Matignon, the original location of the Stettner Gallery that he left behind just after the war broke.
A building like this could have been half empty with people having fled. And you can assume that somebody like Mr. Stettner probably didn't move out by taking his entire furnishings with him. He probably left with a suitcase.
To uncover the painting's fate during the war, we head to the National Archives of France. We get help from Emmanuel Pollack, a historian and an expert on artwork looted by the Nazis.
Aujourd'hui, nous avons la possibilité d'avoir les vrais documents originaux et c'est particulièrement appréciable.
These well-worn pages bear witness to one of the darkest chapters of Europe's history.
Nous avons 151 pièces, donc c'est un dossier important.
In the files, we come across an inventory of items from Stettner's gallery in 1940. Treasures forcibly sold in 3 auctions during the war. Was the Modigliani among them?
Donc des choses très classiques, beaucoup de porcelaine de Sèvres, de l'ameublement.
Mais pas de Modigliani.
Non, il n'y a pas de tableau, il y a très peu de tableaux.
So, no Modigliani painting on that list. But then, an important breakthrough. Records of a 4th auction that took place at Stettner's gallery, this time near the end of the war. They show that a painting by Modigliani was indeed sold along with furnishings.
It looks like the Modigliani was a leftover. That together with the furnishings of the gallery and whatever did not go into the previous sales was put up for sale at the last minute.
But there is a puzzling detail that Modigliani sold for a paltry 16,000 francs. Such a low price disproves any Stettner family claim to a Modigliani masterpiece, says New York lawyer Richard Golub.
I don't think there's any way in hell you could buy a Modigliani for 16,000 francs in 1944, 43, 42, any time like that. Commercially, absolutely too low to be a Modigliani.
But Corte says there's a crucial detail to consider: the date of the sale, July 1944.
You have to keep in mind in July, that is after D-Day in Normandy, so the Allied forces were already on French soils advancing towards Paris. So this may very well, have been a price, the only price that you could realize at that time under those circumstances.
We do know one thing for sure. After the war ended, Stettner made efforts to get a Modigliani back. We hope to find more answers in the archives of the city of Paris, where there is yet another file on Oscar Stettner.
d'autres, voilà, ça c'est donc l'audience du 15 novembre 1946, 4e chambre civile, palais de justice, 13h30.
Stettner filed an official claim to the Paris courts in 1946 for his stolen treasures: a carpet, a painting of himself as a child, and he specifically lists a Modigliani, which he described as a portrait of a man. Was he referring to the portrait of a seated man with a cane?
If you're talking about the same painting, and so far I haven't really seen a credible argument that it's not the same painting or is another painting, then the rest of the story looks pretty good to me in order to support the restitution claim.
In 1946, a Paris court did indeed rule in favor of Stettner's claim, but it came too late. The Modigliani had allegedly been sold off to an unknown American soldier. In 1948, Oscar Stettner died in a small village in the south of France, never having seen his painting again. After the break, the Modigliani Masterpiece would disappear for 5 decades.
Who'd like to come in? 125, I have.
But it reappears with more mystery and controversy sparked by the famous Panama Papers.
But you as a reporter want to make up some bullshit. So make it up. It's over with.
It emerged out of the golden era of modernism in Paris a century ago. A Modigliani painting acquired by Jewish art dealer Oscar Stettner, according to his family today. It was a simple portrait of a man that disappeared around the time of the Nazi occupation of France. Over the years, the demand for Modigliani's art soared. His lavish canvases sold at big auction houses, commanding astounding prices.
So we move to the beautiful Modigliani, 145 million with Louis Cousin. 150 is your bid at 150 million. 152. I'm selling it. Last chance, all done, at $152 million. Sold here, 1561.
For 5 decades, the seated man with a cane remained hidden. And then, suddenly, in 1996, it reappeared, making its entry in the world of the ultra-wealthy through an auction.
15, not yours, Elaine.
It was sold at Christie's, reportedly for $3.2 million US. The buyer? A little-known corporation, the International Art Center. Soon, it was on display in London and New York, in galleries owned by a powerful family of international art dealers, the Namads.
The Namads are most certainly one of the 5 or 6 more important art dealers today.
Vincent Noss has been covering the art world for decades.
And they have probably between 100 and 200 Picassos.
David Namad and the rest of his family won't reveal the extent of their wealth, but Forbes magazine put the value of their collection at $3 billion US.
Art dealing families.
Richard Golub is their high-profile lawyer.
They have impeccable reputations, and they also have impeccable reputations in their business dealings with other people in the art world.
Golub now represents the Namads in a fierce legal battle for seated man with a cane. On the other side, Canadian art investigator James Palmer. He's fighting to get the painting for the Stettner family.
The painting was stolen and it needs to be returned to its owner, period.
The battle over the painting is now being played out in the New York courts. And the Namad's lawyer says the case is clear. The painting was bought fair and square at one of the most reputable auction houses.
Do you think that Christie's would sell a painting that they thought was looted by the Nazis? They completely researched the painting, and there was nothing in the provenance that would indicate that there was a claim by anybody.
But how good was Christie's research? The catalog was short on detail and vague about the ownership of the painting during the war, stating that it came from an anonymous sale, Paris circa 1940 to 1945, right in the middle of the Nazi occupation.
Such language in an auction catalog, it really is a red flag and a warning sign.
Art expert Willy Korte.
How can you refer to the years 1940 to 1945 in an anonymous sale without getting a stomachache?
But there's another twist to this complex plot. The Namads say the case should be thrown out of court because they don't even own that painting that was shown in their galleries.
David Namad has been sued for a reason I can't figure out. The painting is owned by a corporation.
That corporation is the International Art Center. So what is it and who controls it? Turns out it operates out of Panama, a notorious tax haven. Its official address leads to this building in Panama City, home to the law firm Mossack Fonseca, known for creating hundreds of thousands of companies for those wishing to conduct business in the shadows, including art dealers. And we know a lot about Mossack Fonseca thanks to the biggest leak of secret documents in history obtained by the German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung. The Panama Papers were shared with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists and its media partners, including the Fifth Estate. And those leaked documents seem to reveal who is really behind the International Art Center. This is what we learned. Share certificates and documents from 2014 indicate that David Namad was the sole shareholder of IAC at the time. We showed them to the Namad's lawyer, Richard Golub, who happens to be the IAC's lawyer too.
So we have obtained documents, internal documents of the International Art Center.
Have you? Public records?
No, actually, internal documents that show, for example, that the ownership of International Art Center is Mr. Namad's 100% shareholder.
Right.
So Mr. Namad and IAC are one and the same.
No, they're not. That's your point of view. But that's irrelevant. Whoever owns IAC is irrelevant.
The person who owns the company that
that's your point of view.
Well, it's not my point of view. It's the document.
I don't know what the document says, and it doesn't matter what the document says. That document may be superseded. I don't know what that document means, and I don't know where you got it, and it doesn't mean anything.
The question here.
No, I'd like to know that.
We don't go.
The interview's over.
We don't do that.
The interview's. There's nothing else to say. I'm not going to. I told you before. There's nothing else I'm going to say because who owns IAC is about as relevant to this as who's living on Pluto.
But the ownership question is highly relevant because this is the very point Stettner family advocate James Palmer has been asserting for years, and now the Panama Papers seem to be confirming what he suspected about art dealer David Namad.
He's controlling the purchase of that painting. He's the one in control. He's pulling the strings. So that's not a sideshow. That's the main puppeteer, in action.
David Namad, long the darling of the big auction houses, now finds himself in the midst of a growing controversy. He rarely gives interviews, but he spoke out for the first time about the Modigliani controversy in a tape-recorded interview to our colleagues from French newspaper Le Monde.
Une bande de voyous qui sont en train de faire de l'extorsion. C'est honteux pour eux.
Namad, a Jew himself, says he would never accept art that was looted by the Nazis.
Je ne dormirai pas la nuit si je sais que j'ai un bien spolié. Ça porte malheur, c'est un crime énorme.
When pressed on if he would give it back, he makes a most intriguing promise.
Je pense que oui. S'ils peuvent prouver que ce tableau leur appartient, ils peuvent très bien aller à la cour et avoir la facture d'achat. Le tableau a été vendu telle date, c'est ce tableau.
But if there was a sales receipt, will it ever be found? Or is it lost forever in the fog of war? The seated man with a cane is now destined to be fought over in court for many more years. And the final irony, for now, it can't be seen in any gallery in the world. The nomads have locked it up in a giant warehouse in Switzerland where there are thousands of other priceless pieces of art. Enough hidden masterpieces to fill several museums.